Let's look tonight at Acts chapter 25. Now, we got two characters here, Felix and Festus. You remember Festus? Festus was one of my favorite characters on Gunsmoke, and this picture of him pretty well captures what we're going to get into in this Festus now. Now, Festus in the Bible, he wasn't an old, uneducated cowboy. Festus always had a lot of common sense on Gunsmoke. See, he's sitting there now, wait a minute, he's thinking this thing through. And that's what Porcius Festus is going to have to do when he comes to Caesarea. Felix had been governor for 9 years. And we remember last week they were just buttering Felix up about how wonderful he was and how the people were enjoying peace under him. Well, in the 7 years he'd been governor to that time, that was not entirely right. And in the 2 years that followed, things deteriorated rapidly. There were riots in the streets. And those who were somewhat among the Jews in Rome had went to Caesar and says, you've got to do something about this Felix fella. He's not governing well. And Felix was displaced. And Festus comes in his stead. And Festus is coming from outside the whole region. And he doesn't understand all the different intrigues that are going on. And he's like this Festus here. They tell him something, he's going to figure it out. He's going to think it through. Now really, as far as being politically expedient, what we're about to read, Festus is being very politically expedient. He is ready to do things. He doesn't delay, but he's going to be careful. He's not just going to do anything anybody tells him. He's going to try to think this through. Felix, you kind of feel sorry for him. He's in a situation where the society is very unstable and it's deteriorating. He has come to Caesarea and his job is twofold. One, he needs to let them know, now look, you're going to have to respect Rome. Rome is in charge here, and you've got to understand that. But number two, he's going to try to appease the Jews and pacify their anger and let them know things are going to be okay. And he's looking for a chance to do them some favors as he comes into this new governorship. And those things are at cross purposes. So he's trying to weave this through. It's about AD 60. Festus is only going to live for 2 years. And then another governor is going to come in after Festus died. I tried to find out how he died, and I wasn't able to discover the reason that Festus died. But he's coming in trying to do a good job in a deteriorating situation, and he's only going to live 2 years, and he'll be dead. And he will not see what's going to happen, because 10 years later, things had gotten so bad that Rome says, we're just not going to fool with this anymore. Send those armies in there and destroy everything. And let that teach the world a lesson that in Rome you've got to behave yourself. And that vengeance was taking out on Jerusalem at about the year AD 70, and the whole city, the temple and everything is just leveled. Well, this is leading up to that. And as you look at this unrest, think about what this is leading to, and you see an example of it here and what's about to take place. Let me read it to you, and then we'll go through and look at some details in that chapter. Acts chapter 25. Now when Festus was come into the province after 3 days, he ascended to Caesarea to Jerusalem. Then the high priest and the chief of the Jews informed him against Paul and besought him and desired favor against him that he would send for him to Jerusalem, lying wait in the way to kill him. But Festus answered that Paul should be kept at Caesarea, and that he himself would depart shortly thither. Let them therefore, he said, which are among you are able, go down with me and accuse this man, if there be any wickedness in him. And when he had tarried among them the more than 10 days, he went down to Caesarea, and the next day, sitting on the judgment seat, commanded Paul to be brought. And when he was come, the Jews which came down from Jerusalem stood round about and laid many and grievous complaints against Paul, which they could not prove. And while he answered for himself, neither against the law of the Jews, neither against the temple, nor yet against Caesar have I offended anything at all. But Festus, willing to do the Jews a pleasure, answered Paul and said, wilt thou go up to Jerusalem and there be judged of these things before me? Then Paul said, I stand at Caesar's judgment seat, where I ought to be judged. To the Jews I've done no wrong, as thou knowest very well. For if I be an offender or have committed anything worthy of death, I refuse not to die. But if there be none of these things whereof these accuse me, no man may deliver me unto them. I appeal to Caesar. Then Festus, when he had conferred with the council, answered, hast thou appeared unto Caesar? Unto Caesar thou shalt go. And after certain days, King Agrippa and Bernice came to Caesarea to salute Festus. And when they had been there many days, Festus declared Paul's cause unto the king, saying, there's a certain man left in bonds by Felix, about whom, when I was at Jerusalem, the chief priest and the elders of the Jews informed me, desiring to have judgment against him. To whom I answered, it is not the manner of the Romans to deliver any man to die, before that he which is accused have the accusers face to face, and have a license to answer for himself concerning the crime laid against him. Therefore, when they were come hither, without any delay on the morrow, I sat on the judgment seat, and commanded the man to be brought forth, against whom, when the accusers stood up, they brought none accusation of such things as I supposed, but had certain questions against him of their own superstition. And one Jesus, which was dead, whom Paul affirmed to be alive. And because I doubted of such manner of questions, I asked whether he would go to Jerusalem and there be judged of these matters. But when Paul had appealed to be reserved unto the hearing of Augustus, I commanded him to be kept till I might send him to Caesar. Then Agrippa said unto Festus, I would also hear the man myself. Tomorrow, said he, thou shalt hear him. And on the morrow, when Agrippa was come, and Bernice, with great pomp, and was entered into the place of hearing, with the chief captains and principal men of the city, at Festus' commandment, Paul was brought forth. As Festus said, King Agrippa, and all men which are here present with us, you see this man about whom all the multitude of the Jews have dealt with me, both in Jerusalem and also here, crying that he ought not to live any longer. But when I found that he had committed nothing worthy of death, and that he himself hath appealed to Augustus, I have determined to send him, of whom I have no certain thing to write unto my Lord. Wherefore I have brought him forth before you, and especially before thee, O King Agrippa, that after examination I might have somewhat to write. For it seemed to me unreasonable to send a prisoner, and not withal to signify the crimes laid against him. What a dilemma poor Festus has. He's got this prisoner. He's appealed to Rome. And Festus has already determined he's done nothing worthy of death. But he's appealed to Caesar. And I'm going to send him. But I don't know what to charge him with. Well, he was in a political dilemma, wasn't he? Seems like the thing to him to do, justly, was to let Paul have his freedom. That might have endangered Paul, though, to just turn him loose. The Jews are lying in wait for him. He needs to protect this Roman. And so he's going to send him on to Caesar and try to think of something to charge him with, and ask Augustus to come in and help him figure that out. Now let's go back. When Festus was coming to the province after 3 days, he didn't waste much time, did he? I mean, in 3 days, he's already determined, I'm going to go to Jerusalem and meet with them because they're the ones I'm going to have to deal with. And so Festus comes in ready to do something and ready to take action. Now, he ascended from Caesarea to Jerusalem. Just always note that throughout the Bible. Jerusalem's in the hills. And you're always going up to Jerusalem and descending down from Jerusalem. So he ascended from Caesarea to Jerusalem. Then the high priest and the chief of the Jews informed him against Paul and besought him and desired favor against him, that he would send for him to Jerusalem, lying in the wait to kill him. For 2 years, Paul has been kept in Caesarea, in Herod's judgment hall, with a centurion, making sure that Paul was safe and making sure he stayed there. And the Jews were so angry. For 2 years, they're still wanting to put him to death. You know those 40 men that swore they would neither eat nor drink till that? I bet they were mighty skinny now, don't you? That didn't happen. They obviously ate and drank something along the way, but they're still looking for what hatred they had for Paul and what Paul represented. Now, again, think about Festus. I'll go to Jerusalem and see what the problems are, and to bring this up. I mean, you think of all the things that could have been brought up about problems occurring in that society that the chief priest would have wanted Festus to deal with, and they bring up this prisoner that's been there for 2 years. And I bet that would just frustrate Festus. Think, well, this doesn't seem like that important a matter to bring up right off the bat. This is what you're upset about, and this is what you want. And it shows the deterioration of good thinking going on in Jerusalem and in Judea that is going to continue to deteriorate until Rome's just had enough of it, like we said. Well, Festus answered that Paul should be kept at Caesarea, and he himself would depart shortly thither. Festus, he's going to take action, but not just anything. Somehow he realized, I better keep him there, and we'll deal with this when I get there. So, let them come which are among you, go down with me and accuse this man if you have any wickedness against him. We'll deal with it there. Y'all come down, and here we'll hold trial. And so he was there for 10 days, and then he came sitting on the judgment seat. Now, he went down into Caesarea. Did you catch that? And then sitting on the judgment seat commanded Paul to be brought. He could have commanded Paul to be brought, but he waited till he could sit on the judgment seat. That's a seat of authority. That's the judge's seat. When the judge comes in and sits on his seat in the courtroom, that's a symbol of his authority, isn't it? And so he's making this official. We're going to have a trial here, and he sits in that seat of authority to deal with this matter. And when he was come, the Jews came down from Jerusalem, stood around about, and laid many grievous complaints against Paul, which they could not prove. Sounds like he need to take his gavel and holler, "Order in the court! Order in the court!" These Jews are all gathered around. You can just see them all around Paul. He did this. All of them talking at once and accusing him of all these awful things, and nobody can prove anything. Well, Paul answered boldly, "Neither against the law of the Jews, neither against the temple, nor yet against Caesar have I offended anything at all." Absolute innocence, Paul claims. And he lets them know they can't prove any of these things. Now, what's Festus to do? So he's thinking, maybe we ought to do this at Jerusalem. I don't know what's going on in his mind to think to carry this to Jerusalem. But Paul would have none of it. Paul said, "I stand to judge at Caesar's judgment seat, where I ought to be judge. And I've done no wrong." Now, I understand why Paul wouldn't want to go to Jerusalem. He knew the hatred they had for him. He knew they were trying to lie in wait to kill him. And there wasn't anything they could do in Jerusalem they couldn't take care of right here in Caesarea. And Paul would probably see Festus as, Festus is going to give me up to them. And that is illegal. And me being a Roman citizen, I know my rights. in the midst of this whole situation that looks like it's spinning out of control, the one that looks like who is in control of the situation is the prisoner. So he says, if I be an offender, if I committed anything worthy of death, I refuse not to die. But none of those things which they accuse me, no man can deliver me to them. I appeal to Caesar. And that word translated, I appeal to Caesar, was a formal expression, a formal legal expression that just sort of made that appeal official. I'm getting this out of your hands, Festus, and we're going to go up to the next higher level. It'd be like going to the Supreme Court. I appeal to Caesar. And as a Roman citizen, he had that right to do so. And Festus conferred with his council and said, as thou appealed unto Caesar, and to Caesar thou shalt go. Now, notice what Paul says in verse 11. If I be an offender, or have committed anything worthy of death, I refuse not to die. Sometimes the question comes up about capital punishment. Well, the Bible is very clear that He has empowered men of state with the sword to exert capital punishment as is necessary to maintain order. Paul wrote about that in the book of Romans, in Romans chapter 13, that they bear not the sword in vain, and they're a terror unto evil works. God has ordained them to do that. And implicitly, Paul is acknowledging that here. If you've done something worthy of death against the state can put you to death. And Paul acknowledged that they had that authority to do that to him if he were guilty of such. Well, that's just kind of a side note into there that helps us work through these issues like capital punishment and such. Well, now, verse 13, King Agrippa and Bernice came into Caesarea to salute Festus. Agrippa was king up in Galilee. His father had been king in Judea. His great-grandfather had been Herod the Great. And that Herod family had such a political force there that this great-great-grandson was still king over certain province. Something else that the historians will tell us about this King Agrippa, he had the authority to appoint who was to be the high priest in Jerusalem. Now, he didn't reign over Jerusalem. He was king up in Judea. Caesarea had been built by his family. It was much more prestigious to be over Judea than it was to be in Galilee. But nonetheless, he's coming to pay his respects to the new Galilean governor, and he brings with him Bernice. Bernice comes along like his wife, but that's not his wife. It's his sister. You remember Felix had married Drusilla? Well, Agrippa and Bernice are Drusilla's brother and sister. But let me tell you the sad, sad tale of Bernice. When Bernice was 13 years old, she had been forced into a marriage with her uncle. And her uncle didn't live long. After she died, she came to live with her brother, Agrippa. And the rumor got out that they were living like husband and wife, which you don't do with brothers and sisters. Well, Agrippa, to squash this rumor, found someone for her to marry and had her marry off another fella, but that didn't work out either. And so she returns to her brother, and now it's pretty obvious that's how they're living. And it is a disgrace to the Jews that this is taking place. Poor Bernice. After her brother is knocked out of power, these Roman generals come in, and she becomes the mistress both to Titus and to Vespasian that come in to destroy Jerusalem. What a terrible, wretched, heinous life that she had lived. But now here she is with her brother, the second time now she's here with her brother. And she comes to this judgment seat, and they come together to salute Festus. And when they'd been there many days, Festus declared Paul's case to the king, saying, there's a certain man left in bonds. Well, he explained it to him and what his dilemma was. And you see, Agrippa, well, he kind of knew the country. He'd been there a long time. His family had been there for generations. And Festus, he's kind of new on the block. So I'll get Agrippa to help me think this thing through. He understands the customs of the Jews and such, and he'll be able to do that. And Agrippa agrees to do so. You know, it's important, they both know politically it's important that they have a good relationship. Sometimes you can have a real good relationship with someone by finding something you can do for them as a favor. But there's something else you can do. If you want to have a good relationship with someone, let them do you a favor. I mean, it works both ways. And so here they are saying, now here's a chance we can to really firm up our political relationship. And so they bring him down. He explains him. I think I might ought to describe this. Verse 21. When Paul appealed to be reserved unto the hearing of Augustus, I commanded him to be kept till I might send him to Caesar. Now Augustus was not Caesar. We read about Caesar Augustus. The first Caesar is Julius, and they call him Julius Caesar. And after Julius there is Augustus. His name though is Octavius, but they call him Augustus Caesar. The word Augustus, think of the word august. I mean, it's a term of honor, and this is a great, wonderful man, worthy of our esteem. That's why they called him Augustus. And so down through the Caesars, they would refer to the Caesars by this, he is an august man. In fact, when you think about it, we have July and August in our calendar. And that's because of Julius and Augustus. Do you realize that? And so July, August, that's how much they had been honored through that. Well, Augustus, we'll send him to Augustus. The Caesar, though, was Nero. Now, of all the wicked Caesars, Nero stands right up at the top. Nero went mad with his power. But what we sometimes forget, at the beginning of Nero's reign, he was very sharp and very competent. Now, he was still a wicked man, but he kept that under control and managed the Roman Empire very well, and people were very proud to have someone with such capabilities as Nero. It's in the latter part of his reign that he went mad and brought such persecution on the church. So up to this time, he'd been doing pretty good. Paul appealed to Nero Caesar, who Festus refers to in respectful terms of Augustus, and is going to send him there once they hear him out and find out what they can write. And then this next chapter, when we get into chapter 26, Paul is going to stand in the judgment hall, and it's like all the important people. I mean, you know, sometimes things get on the news and everybody focuses in on the crime. You know, the Watergate, the Russian collusion, or whatever it is. They've got somebody, and everybody's focused in, and that's what had happened now in Judea. Everyone's focused in on Paul and Festus and what's going to happen. And in this trial that's going to take place, they all come and gather, and you've got all these important people there. Paul's going to be brought in chains and make his defense, and it's got to be one of the greatest speeches of all history, of what we're about to read in that next chapter. But we'll save that till next Sunday night. There won't be a test on this Wednesday night. We've got singing. So the test will cover 25 and 26. So read them over and get ready. Someday we're going to stand on trial, aren't we? We're going to stand on trial. And you know who the judge will be? Let me read it to you. It's in the book of Romans. In Romans chapter 1. Well, I said it's Romans 1. It's not. So I might not find it right quick. I thought I could turn right to it. But he's talking about the one that's going to be on trial. There's none other than Jesus himself. He says, according to my gospel, will be tried before the judgment seat of Christ. Well, I tell you what, if you're going to be on trial, that's who I want to try me. I don't want to be tried by the civil courts. They might be like these and be more politically expedient than just. And I don't want to be tried by my brethren. I've seen how my brethren have tried folks, and even my good brethren don't always do so good when it comes to putting someone on trial. Paul said we'll be on trial before the judgment seat of Christ. He says, according to my gospel. Now, judgment's a fearsome thing, but it's good news, isn't it? That Christ will be our judge. Look what he has done for us, to give him the opportunity to say, justified. And how little he asks of us that we might take advantage of that so that he can give that verdict. Of all that ever want you to be justified, there is no one that wants you to be justified more than the judge that sits on that throne. That is good news. And so let's do all we can so that he can be just in rendering such a verdict. Let's be baptized into Christ and live and serve him faithfully with a heart of gratitude for his grace all the days of our life, and walk boldly into that judgment hall knowing the verdict will clear us and we'll get to enjoy eternity with him. If you want to respond to the invitation tonight, do it as we stand and sing.